say it was interesting when I speak to Christian missionaries who are very eager to criticize the Quran and the alleged violent nature of Islam. When you just turn it round for a second and say, you do realize, Mr. Missionary or Mrs. Missionary, that in your very own scriptures, you have the command to commit genocide. And I mean, these missionaries are presumably nice people who wouldn't hurt a fly normally. They wouldn't. The idea of torturing a dog or killing your neighbor would be unthinkable. They're civilized human beings normally. But
wow, what a bold claim, eh? You have.
That in your very own scriptures, you have the command to commit genocide.
Paul Williams is referring to a story in the Old Testament where Jews are commanded to genocide the Amalekites, including children and animals. He then claims, therefore, he says, Christians are commanded to commit genocide. Paul cannot recognize the difference of descriptive stories in the Bible and divine commands for Christians.
And this is my universal experience. When I speak to these people and I challenge them on their own scriptures, they will offer rationalizations, excuses, apologetics as to why these stories in Joshua and Numbers and 1 Samuel 15 are okay. They're morally justified. So they will justify the killing of men, women, and children. There are many examples, you can see it on YouTube, where they feel forced, they feel they must honor the Bible by justifying the killing of women and children. Now,
Paul Williams, in a moment of rare enlightenment, he's condemning people putting aside their moral conscience and intuition and following scriptures. Of course, Paul himself doesn't do that. He will support anything the Quran prescribes, no matter how contrary to moral common sense it is. And in principle, he will claim that scriptures are over moral intuition. But now he's criticizing Christianity, so he can be reasonable. But let's see what Daniel Hakikatsu, a person that has appeared in his podcast, let's see what he thinks.
And the other point that you made is that I'm trying to attack the Old Testament for its violence. That's not my point. Like, you completely misunderstood my point, David. My point is that how are you criticizing Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Quran? How are you criticizing us for abiding by this religion when these things are found in the Old Testament and you don't consider Moses to be an evil person? You're the one who is inconsistent. I don't have a problem with the slavery that would have been practiced according to Mosaic law. I don't have a problem with many of these instances of violence and intolerance. The people who have a problem with it are atheists and liberals, the kinds of people that you are sometimes, fraternizing with on your YouTube channel. They are the ones who will criticize the Old Testament for those kinds of acts of violence and intolerance.
Paul Williams, according to Daniel, is an atheist and a liberal when he puts his moral conscience over scriptures. In principle, Muslims agree with the idea that once God commands something, it immediately becomes moral and trumps human moral intuition and conscience. Of course, in contradiction to you, Paul, that you are an amoral cultist and you blindly follow any immoral command Islam prescribes to you, in contradiction to you, I will claim that in true Christian theology, after Jesus introduced the fragile human soul to religion, encounter the Pharisees, the strict law, religious law, I claim, which is truth, that in Christianity, moral conscience trumps the Pharisee kind of religious instructions. Okay, Paul? So, in contradiction to you, Paul, that you disable your moral conscience and you blindly follow all the instructions of Islam, no matter how immoral they are. Okay, in contradiction to you, Paul, in Christianity, that's not the case, my friend. So, you got it the complete opposite. Okay.
I'm ready.
Let's go.
This is a part of our religion. There's a reason to it. Yeah? There's a reason why there's a capital punishment. Because people like you, little weaklings, who leave their religion and cause corruption in the land by spreading it, the capital punishment in Islamic law would be applied to you. We have no doubt. And we're proud of that. Yes? And we, you know what? We'll be watching.
I love how so many of these Islamophobes don't have the ability to represent me fairly by calling this child rape. How is it child rape when there is parental consent?
Both Islam and human rights are in 100% agreement that women are accountable if they break the law. And that means Islam and human rights are in 100% agreement that women should be beaten. We only differ on who should do the beating. You say...
I believe certain anti-Muslim women would wish they lived in the medieval period, a period where if a war was won by the opposing side, it was conventional that people could be taken as booty. Some historical accounts actually say some women would dress up for the captor.
When Muslims go and conquer the adjacent country, the Prophet says, the first thing you do is call them to Islam. If they accept it, leave them. Khalas, they're Muslims, we go. If they refuse, then tell them Allah obliged upon you to pay taxation, jizya. When enemy comes and attack your country, you don't fight. We Muslims protect you. But the ruling is for Sharia. So you do not open nightclubs, you do not fornicate in the streets, you do not, no, Sharia rules. If they refuse, then we have to fight. And if we fight you, then we capture you, you become our slaves, and we take your land, and you take where, because you refuse, I give you two good options.
Paul, in contradiction to Islam that demands people to disable their reasoning and moral conscience and blindly follow instructions, the church in all its history, some of it you described even in this podcast, when Christian teaching were in conflict with commonsensical morality, the doctrine went away, not the moral conscience of people. You freaking hypocrite. That is one of your most popular critique against Christianity. You say that Christianity supposedly corrupts divine law to give way for liberalism and all these kind of things. Isn't that your critique against Christianity? That they are not dogmatic enough, strict enough for your taste? How can you now claim that Christians are in fact those who are compromising their moral conscience for dogma or to protect the God of the Old Testament? What are you talking about? You are in fact doing that, Paul Williams. How can you? Of course, you are not dishonest. You are simply that stupid. Okay, you cannot understand this kind of irony. You accusing Christians of compromising their moral conscience for Scripture. Are you serious, my friend? Anyway, masturbation, Paul Williams.
Can I just offer a reflection at that very point about proportionality and the degree to which just war theory came out of and relies on the Jewish and Christian scriptures, particularly the Jewish scriptures we've not spoken of so far, because there are many passages in the Jewish scriptures, I'm thinking of one particular, but it's not in any way unique, I'm afraid to say, which throws a very different perspective on how war was perceived at that time. Now, these, of course, are the Jewish scriptures. They're not necessarily the scriptures that Muslims believe originally given to the people of Israel, the original Torah, but nevertheless, they are in our modern Bibles. I'm looking at the New Revised Standard Version. And almost a random example from the first book of Samuel, chapter 15, headed here. I'll just read a couple of verses. Headed here, Saul was the first king of Israel, defeats the Amalekites, who are the kind of the enemies of Israel, but spares their king. And it goes like this, and they mention Samuel. Samuel was a prophet. Samuel said to Saul, the Lord, this is God of Israel, Yahweh, in capital letters, that always means Yahweh. Yahweh sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. Now, therefore, listen to the words of the Lord, Yahweh. Thus says the Lord of hosts. And this is the crucial quote. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did in opposing the Israelites, excuse me, when they came up out of Egypt. And this was 200 to 300 years earlier on, by the way. So there was not an existential threat to Israel at all. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did in opposing the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek, is another word for the Amalekites, and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox, sheep, camel, and donkey. Extraordinary list. I'm not quite sure why the animals are in there, but the point here is that this, to today's world, will of course be called a genocide.
Paul, okay. Guys, sorry about what I will say now, but Paul, okay, this guy for 20 years now, he's saying this argument, and he's being responded, but he never learns. So let me address you to what you really are, Paul. Okay, you low intelligent buffoon. Focus for one time in your life. Focus, you idiot. I know that you will hear me now, but in the next day, like you will say the same thing. Okay? But focus. Try to go over your head and focus. Okay. Those are descriptions, you idiot. Those are not direct commands. The Bible is an apocalyptic text. It wants to make the contrast of the primordial human state to the coming of Jesus. Imagine the Bible, my friend, starting with secular Swedish democracy. What the impact of this book would have been? Nothing. So in order to convey a message, you need to make a story. Like you see Lord of the Rings, and there is a story, and in the end there is the catharsis. Even in Greek tragedies, when the son married his mother and killed his father, that was not the moral teaching of the tragedy. Okay, that was just a story to end up to the moral teaching. Okay, you cannot take out of context of the theme of the Bible one picture and say this is the moral teaching of the Bible. No, those are descriptions of events that happened in history. Those are not direct commands for Christians. Don't read the Bible like you read the Quran. We know the Quran is a shallow book with direct commands because the people who made the Quran cannot make stories. They were illiterate and they only know how to make direct commands. But the Bible is an actual book. Paul, it's not rap. You need to see this book in its context. So the Bible is an apocalyptic revelation that leads to Jesus. So it needs to make the contrast of the old covenant, the special relationship of God to the Jews, to give this kind of picture and how that changed. Okay, so you reading, okay, so you cannot take out of context this passage. The other thing you need to understand is that Muslims agree with Christians that if God commands something, it necessarily is moral. The Islamic God commanded genocides in the Noah's flood, in Kidar. A prophet of Islam is commanded directly to kill an innocent child. And those are not stories meant like a story. Those are actually direct commands. So the book you are following actually make direct commands for genocide and for killing innocent people. You have the concept of offensive jihad, you idiot. Okay. There are in the Quran verses that clearly say, kill the unbelievers wherever you find them. Not as a story, direct commands, you idiot. In contrast, the Christianity, the institution, doesn't demand the Christian doctrine. This is what we care. First of all, I am a secular humanist. I'm an atheist. I don't give a rat's ass about your theology. The only thing I care is what the institutions demand. Okay, so Christianity, as the institution of Christianity, doesn't demand people to do immoral things. The institution of Islam does demand people to do immoral things, like offensive jihad, hudud, dictatorships, killing apostates, homosexuals. Okay. Oh, sorry, guys, but sorry.
There's no proportionality here. It is the total annihilation of a whole people. And that is the objective of this command. And what's particularly distressing about this story, apart from the genocide, of course, is the reason because Samuel goes on, I won't read the rest of it, but Saul disobeys this commandment and is removed from his position and status as king. Why? Because he spares the king of the Amalekites and he exterminates everyone else. But because his obedience to this command was not as thoroughgoing and as ruthless as it should have been, he was basically seen as rejected by God and he no longer had the capacity to rule Israel. That was the reason he was rejected.
Paul, every year at 8, you are stoning the Satan's house, isn't that right? What this celebration is symbolizing, do you know? This ritual is an emulation of Abraham stoning of the devil when it is said Satan tried to dissuade him from obeying God's order to sacrifice his son Ismail. So, Paul, every year you celebrate that Satan failed to save an innocent child. And Abraham obeyed God and went on to kill his innocent child. So every year, Paul, you idiot, you celebrate that Abraham obeyed God's command to do something immoral. So, now, let me bring you back to reality, you idiot. Okay. Judaism and Islam commands to erase your moral conscience and follow God. The exception from all this is Jesus Christ. Paul, let me repeat that, you idiot. The only person who pushed back against this, obeying religious law blindly, is Jesus Christ. When he came and he was against the Pharisees, when he refused to stone this woman. Okay? So, according to your moral conscience, then, Paul, you should follow Christianity. Because from the Abrahamic religions, in fact, only Christianity is against that. Okay, Paul? Okay, Paul. Now, please explain how a religion can be true when it produces idiots like you. Always say the complete opposite of truth. So tragically wrong. You are a Greek tragedy, Paul. Paul, your apologetics is a Greek tragedy. Okay, that's how good you are in apologetics. Your reasoning, my friend, is a Greek tragedy. Okay, not just wrong, the complete opposite of truth every time. How what you believe can possibly be true. Please contemplate that, my friend. If Islam was actually true and you were so bright, how come everything you say, the truth is the complete opposite? So like you are demonized. Okay, the errors you are making is like you are demonized. That's how tragic are your errors. You are against Christianity for being the only, in fact, religion that doesn't do what you accuse Christianity of doing, and you are in favor of Islam, that is the most religion that actually does that. Every year you celebrate that. Every year, my friend, you celebrate that. It's your celebration. Guys, sorry. I know that. Anyway, thank you very much. See you the next time.